Welcome to Dark Speak, where secrets never sleep, and the darkness always has something to say. 3 strange stories that happened. My girlfriend and I have just moved into a new house at the end of an alley called Tram MO. For a long time, we have both wished for a quiet home, just big enough to start a new life together. This house, at first glance, seemed to fulfill all those dreams. It had a small yard with a few green trees, a large window looking out the back, and enough room for a black cat named Moreau, the cat we rescued when it was abandoned. Everything seemed perfect, but from the very beginning, there was something that made us both uneasy. That was the house on the right. It was as bare as a hollow body, having been renovated but then abandoned. Inside was dark. The walls were patchy. The grass grew wild. The windows were cold like soulless eyes staring into space. Our backyard and that house were connected. The previous owner had removed the fence to prepare for a new one, but it was never completed, leaving a vast, empty, and terrifying path. At the end of the abandoned garden, there was another fence, separating a plot of land where a few young men often passed by. Occasionally, they would cross the garden of the abandoned house and go out to the main road. I used to think that they knew the owner or were simply too familiar with the shortcut. The first night in the new house, she and I chose to sit in the backyard to enjoy some cool air. The night dew fell in the garden. The sound of insects buzzed. Everything was strange and quiet. We curiously looked at the houses behind, and then an unexpected image made my spine shiver. From the second-floor window of the abandoned house, a man was standing there. He looked straight at us, not avoiding us. His face was pale, expressionless. His dark eyes seemed to be sucked into darkness behind him. The room where he stood was immersed in a thick darkness, as if swallowing every feature, making the figure even more terrifying. I tried to tell myself that it was just someone curious about who the new neighbor was, but he didn't take his eyes off me. Minutes passed. He remained still, motionless like a statue, his empty eyes still locked on us. Time seemed to stretch on forever. More than half an hour passed. He didn't move. A cold wind suddenly blew, carrying the musty smell from the abandoned house. Moreau, our black cat, suddenly stood on end, hissing with hostility, his eyes fixed on the other window. My heart pounded. Both of us looked at each other, neither of us daring to say a word. We packed up quickly, walked quickly into the house, slammed the back door, our hearts filled with fear. I still have a distinct feeling of that gaze lingering on my shoulder. The first night passed in tense silence. But deep in my mind, I knew that the thing standing in the window was not an ordinary neighbor. It was like a lost soul, trapped in that undead house, not belonging to the living, but also not willing to let go of the mortal world. And from that moment, the new house that was our dream began to turn into a real nightmare. A few days later, life in the new house seemed to gradually return to normal. I went to work, while my fiancée continued to unpack the remaining boxes, arranging every little corner of the house. We tried to tell ourselves that the silhouette of the man in the window that first night was just a coincidence, and that the strange things would pass. One night, we sat in the backyard again. The sky was dark but full of stars, and we both looked up, chatting away the heavy feeling of the house next door. Everything was peaceful until we heard a creaking sound, as if someone had lifted the makeshift fence. 3 men suddenly appeared, standing there, their eyes fixed on us. I was forced to speak, knowing that if I remained silent, they would not leave. The youngest, about 29, held a large bag in his hand. I couldn't tell what was inside. He pulled out a few dishwashing tablets, obviously stolen, and offered them to us as a strange joke. We refused. I forced a smile to dispel the awkwardness. He smiled faintly and replied with a short sentence before we all turned and walked away. What haunted me was not the dishwashing tablets, but the way they brazenly entered our garden without asking permission, as if this land belonged to them. That night, we both quietly went back into the house, hoping that everything would stop there. But then in the following days, things started to get worse. They appeared frequently, walking across our garden, using provocative eyes and gestures to intimidate. They crawled to broken fence, circling around the abandoned house as if this was their own territory. Deep down, we all knew they were deliberately targeting us. Two young people, only in their 20s, easy targets for bullying. One afternoon, while I was cleaning the living room, two policemen suddenly appeared, walked around the side of the house, and quietly entered the abandoned garden. They lifted the broken fence, observed for a moment, then left without saying a word. I found it strange, but then consoled myself that they were probably just checking on the trouble the young men were causing. A few days later, the police knocked on our door. They informed us that the house behind us was now empty. The men had been evicted for antisocial behavior, causing trouble not only for us, but for the whole neighborhood. We felt somewhat relieved, thinking that we had finally escaped the annoying stalker. But the nightmare was not over. One afternoon, while I was taking a shower, I suddenly heard a loud noise coming from outside. I quickly got dressed and ran to find my wife. She was standing in the spare bedroom, pointing her phone toward the window to record a strange scene. I asked her what was going on, but she was silent. After a while, she whispered that she had just seen a strange man, one she had never seen before. He was standing in the abandoned garden, pointing straight at our window. When he was discovered, he immediately rushed towards the house. On the way past, he tried turning the handle of our back door, then darted back into the abandoned yard. He tore up the broken fence, then madly smashed all the windows of the empty house. The sound of broken glass echoed through the night. We quickly called the police, showing them the video as evidence. They came, took a statement, then left, leaving us in a nameless terror. Why did he try to open our door? Why did he rush in and vandalize the abandoned house? What did he want? A few nights later, as we lay in bed, the night falling, a cold sound rang out from the dark yard behind. It was a high-pitched, long, wailing whistle, as if someone was standing right under the window, inviting us to come out. The whistle was steady, creepy, tearing apart the silence, signaling that everything was not over. The whistle sounded in the middle of the night, the sound that men often use to tease women, but at 2:16 a.m., it was like a call from the overwhelming darkness. We both held our breath and listened until the sound changed to a gentle knock on the bedroom window. My heart was pounding, my whole body was cold. We quickly turned on the security camera to check, but for some reason, they didn't record anything. The noises outside were silent, as if the person had retreated right after leaving us in terror. That night, neither of us could sleep. The next day, we both decided to stay at my mother's house for the night, hoping to find some safety. However, when we returned the next morning, we were shocked to find that the Ring doorbell had been taken down and placed neatly on the floor. The SD card inside was gone. That proved that the person had returned, and we knew that no one else could have done it but him. We immediately called the police. The woman on the phone advised us to lock all the doors and windows, even bluntly saying that removing the camera could be a sign of a more dangerous plan being prepared. That warning scared us even more. In the days that followed, the nightmares repeated themselves. The whistling in the night, the sudden knocking on the door from the dark yard, the haunting fear of being stalked made us repeatedly call the police, but there was never any clear result. He no longer tried to turn the doorknob, but his presence was always there, like a ghost deliberately trying to wear down our nerves. Then one night, while we were lying down watching a happy video from the camera, we tried switching to live mode, and that's when my blood froze. Out in the garden, right in the middle of the lawn, a man stood tall. He was covered up, wearing a black mask over his mouth and nose, his arms spread out, imitating the pose of Jesus on the cross. His eyes were looking straight up at our bedroom window, his head tilted slightly, his face obscured, making the image even more terrifying. We stood there, stunned. By then, the camera had been moved inside, so it couldn't record. In our panic, we didn't even have time to think about turning back to the screen. He moved his lips as if he was saying something, but we couldn't hear a word. After a few minutes, he turned and walked across the street, but he didn't leave. He just stood there, motionless, his empty eyes still locked on our house for more than 30 minutes. We called the police again. They came, but the response made us even more desperate. They said that staring at other people's houses wasn't a crime, that maybe we were overreacting. Even when we told them in detail about him spreading his arms across the lawn, they shrugged it off as a harmless prank. The next few days, sleep was almost non-existent. Any noise outside, even a falling branch or a cat meowing, would startle us. Then another night, at 2:52 a.m., my phone buzzed with movement. I quickly woke my fiancée. I told her, shaking, that someone was out there, and she opened the camera app. We both gasped. Two men appeared inside of the house, wearing masks, flashlights shining into the windows. One of them was the one who had been haunting us for so long. In his hand was a long metal bar, looking like a crowbar. I couldn't form words. Why us? What was his real purpose? In the following days, he often stood across the street, pointing, waving, or shouting strange things at our window. Every time we looked back, he responded with eyes that were lifeless, emotionless, but filled with threats. We called the police repeatedly, but they did nothing more than give us a few warnings. The harassment continued, persistent, like a never-ending nightmare. Now, the house that was once our dream had turned into a trap. The camera recorded everything, but each video only made us feel more helpless and alone. Just this morning, he stood outside again, motionless, his eyes boring into my soul. We videotaped it, but there was nothing we could do but stare at each other, and I knew this nightmare wasn't over. Let me make it clear from the start that I'm not crazy. I know that as I tell it, it's going to sound like a fantasy, a hallucination, even a lunatic. But I swear that everything I'm about to tell you actually happened. It all started with Face. Or rather, many different faces, but they all had one strange thing in common. 3 months ago, I ended my relationship with Caleb, who had been with me for almost 2 years. The breakup had been a long time coming. Caleb had never been physically abusive or violent, but his control and possessiveness were insidious, exhausting, and calculating. That was probably the scariest kind. He watched my every move, asking me the same questions over and over again to see if my answers changed. He was always testing me, keeping me in an invisible cage. After we broke up, I changed my phone number, deleted my social media, even moved to a new apartment. I thought I was finally free of Caleb, safe. But then it all started. One Tuesday morning, I stopped by a small coffee shop near my new house. I had only been there a couple of times, and this time, the barista, a girl about my age, smiled. But there was something about her expression that sent a chill down my spine. She tilted her head, her eyes boring into mine, and said, "Good morning, sunshine." I froze. That was the nickname Caleb used to call me, and not in a gentle way. He used to say it sarcastically whenever I was upset, as if to mock me. It wasn't a common nickname. How could she know? I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just a coincidence. But then it continued. A few days later, I was taking a carpool to work. The driver was a middle-aged man, about 50 years old. During the ride, he kept glancing at me through the rear-view mirror, his eyes searching, as if he wanted to confirm something. And then he asked, in a tone of creepy indifference, "Have you ever understood what you were running from?" I stammered back, "What?" He just chuckled, shook his head, as if mocking me. My heart went cold, because that was exactly what Caleb had said. The day I told him I needed time to find myself, he tilted his head, looked me straight in the eye, and asked, "Have you ever understood what you were running from?" Now, two complete strangers were repeating those words, word for word, and then it became a recurring nightmare. A woman bumped into me at the grocery store and whispered, "You can't just disappear." A man walked by on the street and said, "Still have that hair." A co-worker in my building whistled, said, "I always liked that song," and immediately started humming the same tune Caleb used to play when we argued. I began to realize that it wasn't the faces that terrified me. It was the way they looked at me. They were all different, men, women, old, young, but in their eyes, I saw the same expression, as if they knew me, as if Caleb were looking through their eyes, borrowing their voices, dropping familiar words to nibble away at the last bit of peace I had built. I couldn't explain it. I just knew that, wherever I went, Caleb seemed to be there. Not physically, but in dozens of different faces, looking at me, whispering in my ear, repeating the things he had said. and I began to wonder, was Caleb really gone from my life? Or was I just entering a strange loop where he was everywhere in every person I met? I thought I was going crazy. Everything was spinning around me like a never-ending loop. When the woman left, I kept my ear pressed to the door, listening for footsteps. But the hallway was completely silent. No sound, no echo, as if she had never existed. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I lay there all night, eyes wide open, my heart pounding in my chest. I just wanted the morning to come quickly. In the morning, I left the hotel and went straight to a crowded coffee shop. I tried to convince myself that it was all just a weird coincidence, that maybe I was too nervous and imagining things. But then, while I was sitting in the shop, a strange man approached. He didn't order anything, didn't look at anyone else, just pulled up a chair and sat down at my table. He spoke in a hoarse voice very slowly. You can change your name, change your house, change your whole life, but you will never escape. I was stunned, my hands trembling as I gripped the hot cup of coffee. He stood up immediately after that and walked away as if he had never been there. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight. Only a cold stream of air rushed back to my brain. I didn't know what to do anymore. I avoided every secluded place, every strange look, but the more I avoided them, the more they seemed to come to me. Different faces, different voices, but all of them repeated Caleb's words, the things he had said to me, word for word, every little detail that no one but him and I knew. One evening, when I returned to my hotel, I found a small piece of paper on the crack of my door. On it was scrawled just one sentence. We're still talking. Sunshine. I dropped the paper as if it were on fire, my back going cold. Caleb couldn't be here. I knew that for sure. He was in rehab. I'd seen him in it with my own eyes. But if it wasn't Caleb, then who? And how did they know every detail of my private life? I felt the walls closing in around me, the eyes of the crowd fixed on me. There was no safe place. I was being hunted, not by one person, but by many faces, the same pair of eyes. We thought that after washing the sheets and cleaning up, we could all sleep peacefully. But as soon as I lay down, the clock just past 3 a.m, I heard the sound again, heavy footsteps from downstairs. This time, it echoed more clearly, more decisively, as if someone was deliberately letting us know they were there. Men sat up, eyes wide in the darkness. Maria pulled the blanket up to cover half her face, gasping for breath. I was almost paralyzed, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound moved slowly around the living room below, then stopped right under the stairs leading to our floor. There was a soft knock, not a knock on the door, but a tap on the steps. Knock, knock, knock. Each echo continued, making us feel like we were suffocating. I strained my eyes to look toward the stairs, where a faint light was coming through the cracks in the curtains. And for a moment, I could clearly see a figure standing on the middle step. Not clear, no details, just a solid black shape, towering motionless. It stood there staring up, though I couldn't see its eyes. I was about to scream when the figure suddenly disappeared, as if melting into the darkness. The knocking stopped as well. We hugged each other tightly. No one dared to sleep any longer. The room was silent until dawn. The next morning, when everyone gathered in the main house for breakfast, we told the story. The adults in the family laughed, saying we must have been haunted by the old garage. But when I led them over to check, right on the wooden steps, there were wet, long marks like shoe prints. The scariest thing was, it didn't rain last night, and we were all barefoot. None of us said another word. We were all silent, only listening to our hearts beating. The 2 clown cards lay there like a strange message, making the room colder than ever. My aunt trembled and said that we should burn them, but my uncle stopped her. He wanted to keep them, thinking that they could be evidence if someone really broke in. But in my heart, I knew that this was not something ordinary people could do. That night, no one slept. A few adults in the family took turns checking the doors and windows, while we children huddled close together in the living room. It was almost 5 o'clock in the morning, when the first light of the new day began to filter through the windows, that the tense atmosphere eased a bit. I was exhausted and bowed my head when I heard my uncle repeat in a low voice, "That shadow didn't walk, It disappeared right before my eyes. At this point, he lit a cigarette, his hand shaking slightly, his eyes distant. It was the first time I had seen an adult in the family so truly frightened. The next morning, we returned to garage to pack up. Everything was intact, except for 3 deep dents on the wooden door, right where the terrifying banging noises had come from the night before. I reached out to touch it. The wood was rough and cold, as if someone had just gone through it. No one could explain. There were no signs of forced entry, no strange footprints, and no suspicious people in that small neighborhood. But the 2 clown cards disappeared, leaving no trace. That night, we moved into the main house together, and no one dared to go near the garage again. And since that night, every time the clock struck 3 in the morning, I would often shudder, remembering the loud explosion and the strange figure disappearing into thin air. When my mother told me, the whole family was silent. No one dared to guess what was happening. The so-called devil's hour had passed, but it felt like something was still lurking around us, waiting to break the fragile peace. My uncle kept insisting that if it were a normal person, they would at least leave a trace, a running sound, a footprint, or a hurried figure. But no, there was only eerie silence and a disappearance into thin air. That second night was a night of reckoning. When my mother heard the noise on the porch and the sound of the basement door shaking, she knew we were all targets. Something seemed to want to break in, not to steal, but to target our family. When she ran down to the basement and found no one, panic spread throughout the house. The adults hastily discussed cutting the trip short. The whispers mixed with fear made us children huddle together, not daring to say a word. The next morning, when the sun was high in the sky, we packed our bags in silence. The abandoned garage, the cold basement, and the Airbnb suddenly felt unfamiliar. No one had the courage to look at the windows or the wooden door where the banging had come from. On the way back, no one slept, no one played music. There were only half-hearted discussions, each with their own hypothesis. But whatever the hypothesis, the most haunting thing was the image of the man standing motionless in the darkness, as if waiting for us to see him. The Airbnb host never responded to the message. Not a single video was sent back. The whole trip left us with a big unanswered question. That night, I still remember clearly, when we had just left the house, I looked back for the last time. Through the frosted glass of the upper floor window, I caught a glimpse of a thin figure, standing silently and motionless, watching. In that moment, the morning light shone in, making his eyes look like deep hollows, no gaze, no expression, just endless emptiness. And I knew that was not an ordinary person. The house was located in the middle of the wilderness, surrounded by only sand, sea, and a few sparse roofs. We understood that Airbnb guests coming and going to be annoying to the locals, but my family was respectful of other people's space, not noisy, not causing trouble. We did not deserve to suffer the strange things that happened during those 2 short nights. It was the first family trip that everyone had been looking forward to, but no one expected it to turn into an unforgettable obsession. We just hoped it wouldn't be our last, although everyone still had a lingering feeling in their hearts, as if something was watching them every step of the way back. Weeks later, my family still occasionally talked about the old story. Each person had their own perspective, their own memories, but everyone agreed on one thing. There was a strange presence in that house, and we were attracted to it. The clown cards, the noise at 3 in the morning, the figure standing still and then disappearing into nothingness, all had strung together into a haunting, inexplicable picture. Since then, I no longer dare to ignore the noises in the night, no longer easily ignore the sudden chills, because I know there are things that exist beyond human understanding. And once accidentally touched, they will leave indelible traces. My first story ends here, a memory that every time I recall it, my heart still beats fast as if I were sitting in the brightly lit garage, listening to every creepy collision in the dark. That seemingly peaceful family trip turned into a terrifying memory. From the invisible footsteps in the garage, the shaking bangs in the middle of the night, to the figure of a man quietly disappearing into nothingness, all made us understand that this place was not normal. The mysterious appearance of clown cards, the cold gaze of the female neighbor, and the silence from the Airbnb host, All were like pieces of a hidden secret. We left earlier than planned, carrying fear and unanswered questions. But there was one thing everyone understood. That place was not for humans. And perhaps we had accidentally entered the game of force that no one in the family dared to mention again. The story ends here. Goodbye and see you in the next video.